Welcome to this Good Friday service. What you will have is the 7 last words of Christ as he died on the cross. So many people in our world today are dying. The number of deaths from this virus is becoming larger and larger every day. And so think of them as you think about Christ's death. It is a sad time, and yet we are going to go forward with God as our helper. So hear these 7 last words of Christ, which begin with the bystander's prologue. I watch a lot of crucifixions. Rome thinks it has to keep peace by keeping order. And the emperor figures that keeping people afraid is the best way to keep order. And if a crucifixion is not enough to make people afraid, I don't know what is. It is about as grisly a form of torture as anyone has yet devised. After the screaming agony of driving nails through nerve and flesh and bone, it is usually 36 to 48 hours or more of unrelieved shame and pain. When people hang there on those wooden beams that meet just above the heart, they are without control and totally naked to passers-by, totally exposed to the elements, the rain, the heat, the wind. Every move they make is agony, but if their bodies sag, that is agony too, and their breath grows terrifyingly shallow. Or maybe at that point breathing doesn't matter to them. Death has become a friend. I always hope when I see such an execution that perhaps madness or unconsciousness will take the condemned person, or that death will be drowned in a fog of unknowing. Of course, in the end, their legs usually are broken to hasten death, a final killing pain. But they are without the strength to even give it voice. And each person crucified is just a tiny cipher in Rome's vast empire. A nothing, a nobody. But believe me, nobodies come in all flavors and varieties. Most of them scream and yell and curse. Some of them are sullen, for as long as they can sustain sullenness. But this one was different. No sound came from his mouth, despite the contortion of his face and the shuddering sick pain that caused him to gag. Even though he was already bloody from flogging, and the woven thorns shoved onto his head added to the blood, he seemed resigned somehow, in a way that very few are. But some of the others at the place mentioned that he had as much as admitted that he thought he was the Son of God, or the Son of Man, or King of the Jews. No Son of God or King of the Jews would wind up like this. Soon enough, he would let the curses fly. I figured that's what would happen, just like those 2 thieves on either side. So I watched him pretty closely. Now listen to this hymn. What were the words that came from this man's mouth? I had not really looked at the rest of the people standing around until he turned his head, slowly, just a little, to avoid tearing his hands and feet any more. A small brown pod of women, and one man among them huddled to one side. White, brave, hurting faces looked out of their dark hoods. Uncaught tears came down, as if to be the waters of justice that wanted to roll but could not. But they looked steadily, unflinchingly, determined that he should see their care, their prayers, their sharing of his agony. The look that passed between him and them cracked through the hot air. Of course, one of them would be his mother. She would be alone now, uncared for, depending upon his family. These crucifixions, these little personal tragedies for these little nobodies, affected a lot more than just the one executed, I guess. I'd never thought about it much. Most of the time, the families did not want to see the shame and suffering. My own mother's face came in front of me in a hazy way. I had not seen her for years, yet she was the one who gave me life. I had a brother and a sister somewhere. What was this love that flowed from him and back to him? He was saying something. Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. He was asking the man to care for her, to take his place, to keep the bonds of love mended. His tenderness opened an aching place in me. I envied him that love. I felt as if I were an orphan. Reflect now as we listen to the hymn. Reflect, all of you, on the wonder of the love you have for your parents, or your spouse, or your children, or your brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles. If it is indeed love that you share, give thanks for it. If there is some relationship that is broken, bring it before God in prayer. In this time of quiet meditation, say to God what you would wish to say to that person, if you had but a short time to live. Say to God how you would like to have the relationship mended. And for this one, I will read, actually, rather than play. And if you have your hymnals, you can look along with me. This is number 245 in our hymnal, and I want to read these words. At the cross, her vigil keeping, stood the mournful mother weeping, where he hung, the dying Lord. Through her soul of joy, of bereaved, bowed with sorrow, deeply grieved, passed that sharp and piercing sword. Who, upon that mother gazing, in her anguish so amazing, born of woman, would not weep? Who, of Christ's dear mother thinking, while her son that cup is drinking, would not share her sorrow deep? For his people's sin chastised, she beheld her son despised, scourged and crowned with thorns entwined. Saw him then from judgment taken, and in death by all forsaken, till his spirit he resigned. Near your cross, O Christ abiding, grief and love my heart dividing, I with her would take my place. By your saving cross uphold me, in your dying Christ enfold me with the deathless arms of grace. The hot wind blowing from the wilderness soon got to him. Jesus could not help but say, I thirst. But kindness is not a rule of crucifixion. So someone brought him a horrible parody of moisture, a sponge of vinegar. I cannot remember whether he chose to ignore it or took its deceptive liquid. Then I heard a murmuring of the crowd. Some of them were remembering the old prophecies of their religion. I looked for pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. And for my thirst, they gave me vinegar to drink. It was odd that old prophecy talked about getting vinegar for water. Some of the people were recalling that he himself spoke of being water. Those who drink of the water that I give them will never be thirsty. Let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink. Then if he possessed such wonderful water, why was he crying out in thirst? The Son of God? It didn't seem reasonable. He was just a thirsty, bloody, dying human nobody. Beside me, an old woman cackled something which I could not make out at first. But finally, after she repeated it several times, I think she said that she had heard him once say, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled." He was thirsty, all right. His tongue was already swollen, and the flesh around his nails was becoming dry. But he did not call out in a panic like so many. He called from some deep place inside himself. When he called to some deep place inside myself. Thirst? Yes, once in my youth, I had felt an unnamed longing. What point was there in life? What was goodness? If I were to follow a path of goodness, would life have a point? But I had forgotten about that. Thirst? You might call it that. Tonight, reflect on thirst. What do you thirst for? What are the deepest yearnings of your heart? Too many people of the world are really thirsty for H2O and for living water. How do we meet those thirsts? Have we ever given a mocking sponge of vinegar? Listen as I play, Jesus, Keep Me Near the Cross. The thieves on either side of Jesus were acting pretty much true to form at these crucifixions. They were trading mocking insults with each other and trying to draw this Jesus into this desperate, tough guy endgame, hurling a final curse at the world in general and at themselves in particular. But he had heard too many curses already. You the Messiah? You can't even save yourself, let alone us. Blasphemer! He is guilty. Crucify him, put him to death. I don't blame him for ignoring them, just shutting them out of this last painful time. Death by crucifixion, if not dignified, should at least afford a person some quiet withdrawal into his own soul. Actually, I was beginning to take an interest in him. I could not figure him out. The thief on his right was a hardened criminal. The record said something about his stealing career starting when he was a child. He deserved this death. He was nothing but a blight on society. He should be made an example. Might just keep someone else from a life of crime. He was a no-good, scum, worthless, unacceptable vermin, plague on the face of the earth. He'd never change. If you let him go, he'd be stealing before the ink was dry on his release. Yeah, I thought it was far better for him to be eliminated. And it sounds like his last scam. He's saying, "Hey, Jesus, what about a good word for me with the big guy upstairs? Remember me when you get to heaven. You must be okay. We deserve what we have gotten, but you didn't earn this horrible death." And Jesus buys it, turns as much as he can and says, "Truly, I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise." What a promise. Maybe scam for scam. But somehow, I don't think so. This Jesus sounds so sincere, and I would not have believed it if I had not seen tears mixed with the sweat on the face of that young brazen thief. Tonight, let us reflect on how open to grace we all are. Do we secretly think we don't need it? That our good deeds and good lives have earned it? Would we deny it to the thief who has not only paid his dues to society, but even mocked society almost to the last? Is grace a scam, or is it salvation? Think about that as you hear this hymn, Jesus, remember me. This Jesus was really a strange one. None of the profiles fit. None of the rules applied. He really was acting as if he thought he was a king, like he would if he believed that he was the Son of God. The Jerusalem Passover crowd was post-mid-morning thick, with chores done and preparations for the evening observances that could wait. They were hurling insults like stones, like a blood sport of breaking the spirit as well as the body. I just have a feeling sometimes that the ones who are the loudest use the noise of their own jeers to drown out their fear of dying. The words thrown at him must have felt like stones being hurled. His head and body jerked whenever another wave of sound hit him. He said he would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. But here he doesn't have the power to get himself down from this cross. He said he would save others, but look at him. He cannot even save himself. Hail, King of the Jews, impostor, rebel, rabble-rouser, troublemaker, blasphemer, good riddance. There were some who did throw small pebbles. Others sent their curses accompanied by spitting, a symbolic way of utterly rejecting him and his claims. As many crucifixions as I've seen, I've never seen anything this cruel and venomous from a crowd. As hardened as I am, I was sickened. He surely would respond to that wave of poisonous hate, if for no other reason than some last shred of dignity. He had to answer this raging torrent against him. And he did. Father, as if he were speaking to a parent that he knew intimately, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Forgive them? Raucous laughter spewed from those who heard. Forgiveness? They were not the ones who needed it, he was. But as for me, I still had not heard the usual reaction to this ordeal. Instead, he was lending it dignity. He was, in a way, in control. His power was showing. Even as he was hanging on that infernal, helpless cross. What an unearthly mercy. Father, forgive them. They have no idea what they're doing. That old woman next to me cackled something about what else he had said when she had heard him speak. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Reflect tonight on forgiveness. What is the purpose of forgiveness? Who does forgiveness help? Is there any alternative to forgiveness for healing the past and offering the possibility of a better future? Who has forgiven you? Who have you forgiven? Where is forgiveness still needed in our own lives and in our world? Listen as I play Amazing Grace. Here it comes, I thought. He made the agonized effort to pull up his weight, to get as much air as he could. And he called out a string of words I could barely understand. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. A shout in the teeth of this hideousness, perhaps. And he had not even begun. He'd only been here for a few hours. If his time was as the others, he'd be here for much, much longer. A murmur went up from the other bystanders. He calls for Elijah. Let us see if Elijah comes. Oh, no, the psalm. My God, why have you forsaken me? But still it was not a curse. It was more like the wailing of a lonely, frightened child. But a child feeling lost would not cry out to a father or mother if that parent didn't care. If that parent had not been loving or was distant or formal, the child would not seek that parent. This was a child who had been known and cared about deeply. This was a cry of one who assumes that the parent is still within shouting distance, is still expecting that the loving parent will return. This was a child. This was a son. Yes, that is what he said, wasn't it? He was the Son of God. I wondered, and the crowd became very quiet. Perhaps behind all their shouting and insulting, there was some part of their souls waiting and wishing that he would be saved from this cross, that his God and theirs would not forsake him, would do some deed of power or some miraculous sign. Perhaps his anguish had finally touched a responsive human chord. The cry that went up to the darkening sky fell back and whispered through the ominous breeze, my God. And it seemed to me that in it lay all the fear, all the agony, all the lonesome roads, all the sin of the world. I guess that is what separates people from their God. Oh, my God, I miss you. I want you. I need you. Let me be with you, and you with me. Tonight, let each of us reflect on all the lonely, abandoned places of his or her life. When has tragedy made us cry out as if we are forsaken? What is it that aches, or perhaps feels lost from God? In this time of reflection, sit quietly with those places. Let the warm presence of God slowly seep into your heart, filling it with the light of love. And would you hear as I play, Precious Lord? Maybe his God found him. Maybe at least there would be the mercy of a quick death. His haggard face, dotted with dried blood, began to droop forward. His swollen tongue and his collapsing lungs would only let him whisper, a whisper that could barely be heard above the quickening wind and the growling, menacing thunder from the boiling clouds. He gazed now at a world that was most certainly not in front of his physical eyes, a world apparent only to the eyes of his spirit. Maybe he was speaking to God, explaining, "It is finished." What was finished? Just his life. His followers were fled. His clothes were awarded in a light-hearted lottery. Or was there something more? As if he'd had a message to deliver, a mission to accomplish. It is finished. The music has stopped. The dance partner has left. The scroll is rolled up and returned to its place. The meal has been eaten. The bag is packed and ready to go. It is finished, I thought. And how will I feel when I must let loose of this life? No more plans, no more dreams, no more fear, no more. Simply lay down life. It is finished. Then I got a new thought. Maybe finished is never really finished. I hope somebody will remember me. I hope someone will be better off because of me. I hope something of myself will linger behind. I want my life to be some kind of mission. I desire my life to carry some kind of message. I hope that the way I live and the way I die will be the beginning of something, not the end, printed at the close of the story. And I'll bet this man on the cross, this Jesus, might have hoped so too. Reflect this night on what you have left as a wonderful legacy for the future. Do not be afraid to name it and claim it and bless it. Reflect on what you might like to leave. When the time comes to say, "It is finished," what will you want to have go on? Reflect on that as I play Beneath the Cross of Jesus. by now. I was so involved with this man that I drew to the very foot of the cross. The wind was screaming and the crowds had dispersed, except for his family and some loyal followers. The sky was black. Then came a brief lull in the Z-shaped lightning, and the wind, as if the whole earth were pausing. His breathing gave up its harshness. His face gave up its tension. His body gave up its struggle to be upright. His spirit seemed to be poised for flight. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. In that moment, the lost child had come home. In that moment, he had presented his life, his heart, his soul and spirit to his God as a shining treasure, had laid it into the hands of his God. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. I can still hear his voice. He was gone. His legs did not have to be broken. Some of the soldiers stuck a spear in his side, and his blood mixed with water and it poured forth. It seemed to me as if all the love and sorrow of this crucifixion was flowing down. What an extraordinary man! And he called himself the Son of God. Let us each reflect tonight upon our relationship with our God. Is our God so close and so real to each of us that we can say with utter sincerity and love, into your hands I commend my spirit. Let God be that close and that real for each of us. It was not just the earthquake that followed. That convinced me. It was the manner of his dying, his steadfast love for his family and friends, his mercy for those who were spitting at him, his grace toward a convicted felon. And he was not afraid to be who he was, thirsty, in pain, feeling lost and abandoned. But he knew his God. He loved his God. He talked to his God in a way that I had never heard. So the earthquake and the temple curtain torn in two were just the final pieces of the puzzle. I had to be at that crucifixion. I am a Roman centurion whose cohort detail is to carry out these crucifixions. But I am the Roman centurion who fell on his knees weeping and said with awe, to Rome, this man was a nobody, but truly, this was the Son of God. The darkness is complete. Listen as I play, O Sacred Head Now Wounded. Go quietly now into this night and hear this benediction. Let us go unafraid into this darkness with the same kindness, grace, mercy, and trusting faith that Christ showed in his last hours on the cross. For we know what he knew. The new day will come, new life will come, and love and grace will one day overcome all evil, and we shall all walk free. Amen.